Christmas, the season of joy, warmth, and cherished memories. But beneath the lights and laughter lies a shadow, a darkness waiting to creep into the most festive moments. Tonight, we uncover what happens when the holidays take a sinister turn. Welcome to Eerie Road Tales. Tonight, we take you down a chilling path of holiday horrors. 3 unsettling stories await: a stranger's haunting visit, a sinister Santa encounter, and an Airbnb stay that turned into a nightmare. Get comfortable, but don't get too comfortable, because these tales might make you think twice about the season of cheer. Let's begin. Daniel had always loved the holidays, the warm glow of string lights, the scent of pine filling the house, and the feeling of companionship during cold winter nights. But this year was different. The house was quiet, too quiet. After his 2-year relationship ended, he found himself spending most evenings alone. The silence of an empty home wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. To escape the loneliness, Daniel turned to dating apps. Not for romance, necessarily, but for distraction. A simple message, a conversation, anything to fill the void. That's how he met Jenna. Her profile was unremarkable: brown hair, a bright smile, and a love for Christmas, or so her bio said. They exchanged a few messages weeks ago, but the conversation fizzled out before it really began. He hadn't thought about her since. Until tonight. The notification came while he was arranging ornaments on his half-decorated tree. Jenna had commented on his Snapchat story. "Cute tree. Want some help finishing it?" Her sudden reappearance was surprising, but Daniel shrugged it off. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just loneliness making the decision for him. They chatted for a while, and before long, she invited herself over. She was free that evening and seemed oddly insistent. Daniel hesitated but eventually relented. By 9:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. When Daniel opened the door, the cold December air rushed in, and with it, Jenna. She was taller than he'd imagined, easily 6 feet, and bundled in a long, dark coat. Her hair hung limp, and her face was pale, almost sickly. But what struck Daniel most was the overpowering perfume she wore. It was sweet and cloying, like cheap roses, but beneath it lingered something sour, something he couldn't quite identify. "Hi. Wow, it's so cozy in here," Jenna said, her voice overly cheerful. Daniel forced a smile and stepped aside to let her in. As she walked past, he felt an unexplainable unease. She seemed off. Her movements were too deliberate, her steps heavy as though she weren't used to walking in her own skin. "Nice tree," she said, gesturing to the half-decorated fir. "Let's finish it." Daniel grabbed a box of ornaments, trying to shake the discomfort that was settling in his chest. He poured them each a glass of wine, hoping it would ease the tension. Jenna accepted hers but only held it, never drinking. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner as if she were cataloging it. As they worked on the tree, Jenna's oddities became harder to ignore. She laughed at the wrong moments, her voice loud and unnatural. Her hands trembled slightly as she hung ornaments, and once, Daniel caught her staring at him when she thought he wasn't looking. He told himself he was overreacting. She was just nervous. It was their first time meeting, after all. But then he began to feel strange. At first, it was subtle, a light-headedness he attributed to the wine. But soon, his limbs felt heavy, and his head grew foggy. His vision blurred, and it became harder to focus on Jenna's words. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice devoid of genuine concern. "I think I just need a second," Daniel mumbled, excusing himself. He stumbled toward the crawlspace to fetch a box of decorations, hoping the cold air would clear his head. The crawl space was dark and cramped, the air stale with a faint hint of mildew. Daniel rummaged through the box, his fingers brushing against dusty garlands and cracked ornaments. But the unease he'd felt earlier didn't leave him, it grew. When he returned to the living room, Jenna was gone. "Jenna," he called, his voice shaky. Silence. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the Christmas tree lights. He checked the kitchen, the hallway, and the front door. It was still locked. She couldn't have left. His heart began to race. Something was wrong. Daniel collapsed onto the couch, his body refusing to cooperate. His limbs felt like lead, his breathing shallow. He tried to sit up but couldn't. And then he saw it. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized someone was standing there. A tall, dark figure, just beyond the glow of the Christmas tree lights. "Jenna," he whispered, though he already knew it wasn't her. The figure didn't respond. It stood perfectly still, its head tilted slightly as if studying him. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears as he fumbled for his phone, the only source of light within reach. With trembling fingers, he turned on the flashlight. The beam of light landed on Jenna's face. Her expression was blank, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was standing in the corner, her hands at her sides, her body unnaturally rigid. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without warning, Jenna turned and bolted. Her footsteps thundered down the stairs, and the front door slammed shut. When Daniel finally regained control of his body, he searched the house. His medications were gone. So were a bottle of vodka, his vitamins, and some loose cash from the kitchen counter. Panicked, he tried messaging Jenna, but her Snapchat account had vanished. Her profile on the dating app was gone too. It was as if she had never existed. But Daniel knew better. He could still see her silhouette in his mind, the way she stood in the dark, silently watching him. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he'd never forget that image. Every creak of the house, every shadow on the wall, brought it back. And every Christmas since, Daniel has avoided decorating a tree. The winter of 1997 was one of the coldest in recent memory. Snow blanketed the quiet streets, and the air carried an icy stillness that seeped through windows and doors. For 7-year-old Sam and his 5-year-old sister Mia, it was just another ordinary evening. Their family didn't celebrate Christmas, so the holiday decorations and twinkling lights that filled their neighborhood were like a distant world, a world that didn't include them. Sam sat cross-legged on the faded living room rug, flipping through a well-worn comic book, while Mia lay sprawled on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. The faint hum of the television filled the silence, though neither child paid much attention to it. Their father, a dedicated doctor, was working another long shift at the hospital, as he often did on holidays. Linda, their mother, was slumped in an armchair by the window, a half-empty glass of wine dangling from her hand. Her head lolled to the side, her eyes fluttering shut every few moments. The kids knew better than to disturb her. Linda wasn't the kind of mother who tucked you in at night or sang lullabies. No, Linda had her own battles, and most nights, those battles ended with her passed out in a haze of alcohol. Sam had learned to take care of things himself. At just 7, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his small shoulders. He kept Mia close, made sure she was safe, and waited for their dad to come home. But tonight, something felt different. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, the only sound competing with the faint murmur of the television. And then it came, a knock at the door. Sam froze. His eyes darted toward the front door, where a tall shadow loomed just beyond the frosted glass panes. Mia sat up, her curiosity piqued. The knock came again, louder this time, and Sam's heart began to race. Through the glass, he could make out a figure dressed in red. A large sack hung over the man's shoulder, and his face was obscured by a bushy white beard. For a moment, Sam thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe one of the neighbors was playing Santa Claus. But then the man waved. "Ho, ho, ho," the figure called out, his voice muffled but cheerful. "Merry Christmas." Mia's face lit up. She slid off the couch and ran to the door, her tiny hands reaching for the doorknob. "It's Santa," she whispered excitedly. Sam grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Wait," he said firmly. Peering through the glass, Sam studied the man more closely. Something wasn't right. His beard was slightly crooked, and his eyes darted around nervously, like he was looking for something, or someone. The sack over his shoulder bulged awkwardly, its contents shifting as the man shifted his weight. "Can I come in?" the man asked, his tone still friendly but with an edge that made Sam's stomach twist. "No," Sam said, his voice trembling slightly. "Santa isn't real, and he doesn't bring presents to Jewish kids." The man's demeanor changed in an instant. His smile faded, replaced by a hard, angry expression. He leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging the panes. "Open the door," he demanded, his voice low and menacing. Sam backed away, pulling Mia with him. "Go to the kitchen," he whispered. "Call 911. Mia hesitated, her wide eyes filled with fear, but she obeyed. She ran to the phone while Sam stood frozen in the living room, his gaze locked on the shadowy figure outside. The man pounded on the door, his fists slamming against the wood with a force that made the glass panes rattle. "Let me in," he shouted, his voice echoing through the silent house. In the kitchen, Mia fumbled with the phone, her small fingers pressing the buttons clumsily. When she finally got through to the operator, her voice was shaky and filled with desperation. "Santa's trying to get in," she said, her words tumbling over each other. The operator sighed. "Sweetie, Santa isn't real," she said, her tone dismissive. "You shouldn't make prank calls on Christmas Eve." The line went dead. Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she dropped the phone and ran back to the living room. Sam wrapped his arms around her, trying to think of what to do next. The man outside was relentless, his pounding growing louder and more frantic. And then Sam had an idea. He grabbed a box of candles from the mantel and quickly lit them, his hands trembling. Holding one of the lit candles close to the smoke detector, he prayed his plan would work. The piercing sound of the smoke alarm shattered the tension, filling the house with an ear-splitting wail. Sam held Mia close as the sound blared, drowning out the man's shouts. Minutes later, the distant sound of sirens broke through the chaos. Red and white lights flashed outside the house as a fire truck pulled into the driveway. The man at the door froze, his head whipping toward the commotion. The firefighters arrived quickly, their boots crunching against the snow as they approached the house. The man tried to intercept them, waving his arms and shouting. "I'm their father," he said hastily. "I heard the alarm and came to help." But Sam and Mia ran to the firefighters, their voices overlapping as they told the truth. "He's not our dad," Sam shouted. The firefighters restrained the man, their faces grim as they escorted him away. His protests faded into the night as the red and white lights disappeared down the street. When their father arrived home, his face was a mixture of relief and fury. He stormed past the firefighters, his gaze landing on Linda, who was still slumped in her chair, oblivious to everything that had happened. "How could you let this happen?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. But Linda had no answers. As the man in the Santa suit was taken away, Sam stared out the window, his small hand pressed against the cold glass. He couldn't shake the feeling that their Jewish identity had saved them. If they had believed in Santa, if they had opened that door, he wasn't sure they would have survived the night. Even years later, Sam would remember the sound of the man's fists against the door and the chilling shift in his voice. Christmas Eve, for him, was no longer a night of joy. It was a night when danger came dressed in red. The Pocono Mountains were the perfect escape, serene, picturesque, and secluded. For Alex and Charlotte, it was exactly what they needed. After a grueling year filled with work deadlines and life's everyday stresses, the idea of a cozy weekend getaway felt like a dream come true. The Airbnb they booked was stunning. A charming log cabin tucked away in the woods, surrounded by towering pines and blanketed in pristine snow. Inside, it was decorated for the season. Twinkling string lights wrapped around the banister, stockings hung by the fireplace, and a beautifully adorned Christmas tree standing proudly in the corner. "This is perfect," Charlotte said, her face lighting up as she dropped her suitcase by the door. Alex grinned, pulling her into a hug. "Told you it'd be worth the drive." The plan was simple: a weekend of relaxation with no interruptions. They'd brought wine, their favorite board games, and plenty of warm blankets to curl up under. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the snow, the cabin's charm took on an eerie quality. The first knock came just after dinner. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet of the cabin, it startled them both. Alex exchanged a glance with Charlotte, who looked equally puzzled. "Maybe it's the host," Alex said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure. When he opened the door, a man stood on the porch. He was bundled in a heavy coat, his breath visible in the cold air. His face was pale, his smile wide but not quite warm. "Hey there," the man said, shifting a little awkwardly. "Name's Gary. I help my brother run this place. Just wanted to check in, make sure everything's good for you too." Alex hesitated. They hadn't been told about a co-host, and something about Gary felt off. His smile lingered a second too long, and his eyes seemed to flicker past Alex, scanning the inside of the cabin. "We're good, thanks," Alex replied curtly. Gary nodded, but he didn't leave right away. "Well, if you need anything, I'm just down the road," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the woods. "Enjoy your stay." As soon as the door shut, Charlotte spoke up. "That was weird, right?" Alex nodded. "Yeah, definitely weird." Later that night, they decided to take advantage of the cabin's outdoor hot tub. The air was freezing, but the steaming water was inviting. Wrapped in towels, they stepped out onto the deck, the snow crunching under their bare feet. For a while, everything felt peaceful. The heat of the water, the faint hum of the jets, and the stillness of the surrounding woods were calming. But just as Charlotte leaned back with a sigh, Alex heard it, a faint crunch of footsteps in the snow. He sat up, his eyes scanning the darkness. "What is it?" Charlotte asked, her voice tinged with concern. Alex shook his head. "Probably just a deer or something." But his voice lacked conviction. The sound didn't come again, and eventually they returned inside, locking the doors behind them. The night passed uneventfully, until the banging woke them. It was loud, urgent, and coming from the front door. Charlotte sat bolt upright, clutching the blanket to her chest. "Don't answer it," she whispered. Alex grabbed his phone, its faint glow illuminating his face. The clock read 2:37 a.m. Whoever was outside wasn't supposed to be there. "Stay here," Alex said, his voice low. "No, Alex, please don't," Charlotte began, but he was already moving. He crept to the living room, his heart pounding with every step. The banging stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Slowly, he peeked out the window. The porch was empty. Morning came too slowly. Alex barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities. Was it Gary, a random stranger, or something worse? As he stepped outside to clear his head, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Footprints. They circled the cabin, weaving between the trees and looping back around to the front door. Whoever had been outside had spent a long time watching them. Gary showed up again later that day, unannounced. "Morning," he said, his tone far too cheerful. "I was just in the area and figured I'd stop by. Thought I'd check the water heater. Hosts told me it's been acting up." Alex's stomach tightened. He stepped onto the porch, blocking the doorway. "The water heater's fine," he said. Gary's smile didn't falter. "You sure? Won't take but a minute." "We're good," Alex said firmly. Gary's gaze lingered, but he eventually shrugged and turned to leave. As soon as he was gone, Alex grabbed his phone and texted Mike, the Airbnb host. "Do you know someone named Gary?" he typed, his fingers shaking slightly. The reply was almost immediate. "No." "Why?" Panic set in. "Pack your stuff," Alex said, rushing into the bedroom. "What's going on?" Charlotte asked, fear creeping into her voice. "We're leaving. Now." Charlotte didn't argue. They threw their belongings into their bags, their movements hurried and frantic. Alex kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see Gary standing there, watching them. As they loaded the car, Alex's worst fear came true. Gary emerged from the woods, his coat flapping in the wind. "Leaving already?" he called out, his voice carrying an unsettling edge. Alex didn't reply. He slammed the car door shut and started the engine, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. As they drove away, Charlotte glanced back. Gary stood in the middle of the road, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The police found no trace of Gary. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been on the property. The woods were undisturbed, as if the entire encounter had been a figment of their imagination. But Alex knew better. Even now, whenever he thinks about that weekend, he can't shake the feeling of being watched. He avoids cabins, avoids the woods, avoids the Poconos entirely. Because somewhere out there, Gary is still waiting. A stranger who vanishes without a trace, a Santa with sinister motives, and an uninvited guest in the mountains. These three stories show us that even in the season of joy and togetherness, darkness can find its way in, unnoticed, unexpected, and unrelenting. Maybe it's the loneliness of the holidays that brings these shadows closer. Or perhaps, it's simply a reminder that not everything that knocks at your door brings good tidings. These tales serve as a warning. Trust your instincts, stay vigilant, and always question the face behind the mask. What was the scariest moment for you? Was it Jenna's haunting silhouette, the pounding fists of the sinister Santa, or the chilling smile of a stranger in the woods? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into the eerie and unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale from Eerie Road Tales. New stories arrive every week, but be warned, some of them might just hit closer to home than you'd like. And remember, sometimes it's better not to open the door.